Time for our regular look at some of the other stories in the news. It's behind the headlines. Let's start right here in the UK. The British newspaper, The Metro, one of our main stories, one we've been talking about just now, that the UK is no longer apparently a system rigged against people from ethnic minorities. This report, which was commissioned by the British government, says the UK should be seen as a model of racial equality. The Washington Post reports that mosque, synagogue and church membership in the United States has dropped below 50% for the first time in nearly a century. The Western Military Alliance, Nato, says its jets were scrambled 10 times on Monday, all to intercept Russian warplanes, which are engaged in what NATO calls an unusual peak of flights across Europe. This is in Business Insider. And finally, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, the leader of the world's Anglican Church, says he did not marry Harry and Meghan 3 days before their official wedding. You may remember that Meghan Markle claimed that in the interview that the couple gave to Oprah Winfrey recently. This is in the London newspaper, The Evening Standard. Let's talk about these stories with the French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani and the political editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper here in the UK, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, welcome to the programme. Nigel, let's start with you. This report was commissioned by the British government and it's exonerated the British government. What do you make of it?
Well, I've never seen a report panned quite so furiously immediately after publication. My inbox was just full of howls of outrage after it was published at 11:30 this morning. One teaching union came on and said it was an insult. The Sikh Federation called it deeply disappointing, and the Trade Union Congress complacent. I mean, there are some astonishing claims in there, including that there was some kind of cultural benefit from slavery, which is just quite bizarre. So I'm not sure this has actually helped race relations hugely. A few positives, that the words black, Asian and minority ethnic, which we've used to describe a whole group of people, will probably go. But I don't think this report went nearly far enough, and it shows there's an awful lot more work to do.
Yeah, the cultural benefit of slavery, bizarre, because it kind of said something about, while we have to recognise the damage done by slavery, we should also look at how slavery has helped the Afro-Caribbean community in this country integrate into British society. Nabila, it's wrong for me to say that the British government was exonerated. It was commissioned by the British government, but it's really exonerated British society.
Well, yes, indeed. And what I can say is probably the only good news about this report is that it proves that we are all talking about issues such as race, discrimination and indeed inequality. And one thing that the pandemic has done is focus minds about the way we all relate to one another and how we can improve within a multicultural society like the UK. But sadly, that's probably about the most positive I can be about this particular report. And the truth is, Downing Street is wrong when it states that Britain should be held up as an example of racial equality. On the contrary, if nothing else, the Black Lives Matter experience has shown just how fearful and indeed worried a lot of Black and other ethnic minority communities in fact are. Just look at the way multi-millionaire footballers advertise BLM before every game nowadays. If these massively privileged, pampered stars feel there is still great injustice in society, then imagine how others are feeling. Inequality in health provision is a key issue right now because of coronavirus, and minority groups are certainly suffering far more than others during the pandemic. The report does actually acknowledge that there is racism in Britain, but crucially, it claims that there is no institutional racism in the UK anymore, something that is very hard to believe. I think it's very important to bear in mind that, semantics is dominating the debate raised by this report. Experts of all types are arguing about what words mean rather than the problems that people experience in their day-to-day lives.
Nigel, why do you think that there is still a certain lack of understanding of how much diversity can help also address inequality? It was the mid-90s. I joined an international broadcasting corporation only because they were offering traineeships for non-white people. Otherwise, I may not have been on the career path that has ended with me being right here talking with you. I think I proved that I could do the job as well as anybody, regardless of race. But diversity is something that can obviously help inequality, and it can just help businesses make more money, which is what business is for. And I say that because there's a report out that says that Hollywood is losing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars because of its lack of diversity.
Yes, and there are a lot of British companies, including my own, which are trying to make the workforce much more diverse. And so I do think that things have improved in this country since the 90s, but they clearly haven't gone far enough. And that's why this report seems so complacent. I mean, as a middle-class white man, I'm always very aware of the unconscious bias that might be inherent. And it's often very difficult to police. But according to this report, they say that we shouldn't be paying for unconscious bias training. But those are kind of the key things that will make Britain a much more integrated and diverse society in which everyone can live together.
OK, let's move on. Unconscious bias training, of course, was suspended for government employees by President Donald Trump, wasn't it? OK, the Washington Post, Nabila, reporting about the drop in membership of mosques, synagogues and churches. I'm not surprised at all by this.
Well, on the surface, this is a pretty surprising story, considering how used we are to seeing very religious men running America. Remember, they swear on the Bible when sworn in, and God in general plays a huge part in American public life. In God We Trust is actually written on US banknotes, for example. And Joe Biden is a devout Catholic who goes to church as much as he can, while even Donald Trump was a serious Christian while in office, and we know that many of his supporters were too. And these are the kind of indications that show that religion is still hugely important in America in a way that is not. It is not in a country like the UK. And I think it would still be pretty much impossible for a non-believer who is not linked to a church to become US president. The figure of 70% of Americans being members of a church just 20 years ago is actually pretty astonishing, more so, I would contend, than the number being well down today. And of course, it's down because the last 20 years has seen an explosion in demands on people's time. And every form of information and entertainment and communication is open to Americans through technologies that was just only getting going 20 years ago. And now it's in fact very easy for people to get their spiritual fulfillment online or on TV via TV preachers and the like, without actually traveling to a mosque or a synagogue or indeed a church. And I think that Americans are actually declaring that old-style conventional lives are less common now and that they are discovering new ways of doing things.
Nigel, would you think that possibly it might simply because during the passage of time, as science begins to prove so much of the known universe and what's happening in terms of how we live, that, of course, religion having come from the times when people didn't understand exactly how things were structured around us, the living universe, that possibly people have said, OK, hold on, I'm kind of going more towards science than believing that there'll be a greater being that's controlling everything around me. I don't know.
Well, that could be part of the answer, but I think in this case that the key thing is that young people are turning away from mainstream religions. And the reason for that is that they tend to march 20 years behind the societies they represent. So, for instance, my own Anglican church didn't consecrate a woman bishop until 2015. It still will not allow same-sex couples to marry in church. And this is a particular Western problem. It's just the church, synagogues, mosques are just not moving with the time. Yet you look over in the Far East, and there In South Korea, Christianity is flourishing with mega churches of congregations of thousands. And even in China, it's predicted that the biggest Christian population in the world will be there by 2050, and quite possibly the biggest Muslim one too, unless the Chinese try and crack down on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, whether we believe in science or not, it doesn't negate the fact that people also seek spiritual guidance. OK. Nigel, what about this one on NATO? And these were different. They were fighter jets and also Russian bomber planes for flying very close, if not entering NATO airspace. And this has been going on for a long time. Russia clearly knows exactly where its planes are and how much it's going to annoy NATO. So why bother?
Oh, well, I think they're probing our defences. And why this is so serious is although they've always been doing it, they seem to be doing it an awful lot more. So this report from NATO shows that NATO jets were scrambled 10 times on Monday to cope with Russian warplanes which were coming very close to NATO airspace. Now, it seems to be just part of President Putin's ramping up the pressure. I don't think we're in danger of having a nuclear war in the same way that we were 50 years ago. But the more this goes on and tensions increase, there is a danger of some kind of conventional warfare. What happens if one of those jets without its transponder on hits a civilian aircraft? There are a whole host of things that could spark a real conflagration. And that's why it'd be quite handy if President Putin just pulled back a bit.
Nabila, it's a bit like China sending its fighter planes into the strait that divides the mainland from Taiwan, in a way. I mean, these big countries are going to, as Nigel said, test their neighbours, aren't they?
Yes, they're very much in the news in the West, not necessarily for the right reasons. And the Russians in particular are meant to be everywhere now, whether hacking into our computers or sending planes to spy on us. So this story doesn't come as any surprise, to be honest. And they are echoes of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was constantly trying to prove that it was much more powerful and generally better than the decadent West. And the two sides were constantly watching each other so as to try to steal an advantage. And here we're talking about NATO scrambling its fighters constantly in response to what they call unusual peaks of Russian flights in several areas, which actually sounds very sinister. If you've studied the Cold War, it conjures up terrifying incidents involving spy planes, secretive intervention, and indeed a period when two massively well-equipped blocks came very close to nuclear war. And it's very noticeable here that Russia is not responding to the accusations against it, which is particularly worrying. George war is better than war, was the old saying, and it's much better to have potential military enemies talking to each other over incidents such as this. And I think NATO is quite rightly urging Moscow to resume dialogue about what is going on, and relations between Moscow and NATO are, of course, deteriorated significantly in 2014, remember, over Russian intervention in Crimea and indeed eastern Ukraine. And there have been further arguments over issues such as gas pipelines from Russia to Germany. And so, tensions are growing, and the West relations with China are a big part of this power games too. And it's potentially catastrophic drama, which, again, certainly has Cold War echoes.
OK, final story. We had talked about Meghan and Harry the last time that you guys were on together. Nabila, you corrected me when I was treating it almost like a frivolous story and said, no, there are serious issues here. But Nigel, you first. Will the Sunday Mirror cover this angle of the Archbishop of Canterbury basically saying that Meghan and Harry aren't telling it like it is? I didn't marry them.
Well, sadly, the story's broken too early in the week for me, that we concentrate on news just before Sunday. But I mean, it is a fascinating story. I don't think any of us actually believed Meghan when she said that the Archbishop of Canterbury married her 3 days earlier than the rest of us thought. And what Justin Welby has revealed is that had he done so and then signed the legal document on the wedding day 3 days later, he'd have been committing a serious criminal offence. So there was no way he was going to do that. And nowadays, we don't like to actually jail our archbishops. So I'm sure that Justin Welby, of all people, would be obeying the law.
Nabila, we had a long discussion in the office about whether we should do this story or not. And obviously, we are covering it. But the thing is, if Justin Welby is telling the truth, that means that Meghan Markle was not. So then her reputation is damaged, surely. And the next time she speaks, people may wonder whether it's all 100% kosher.
Well, absolutely. And this just shows how the royal soap opera really takes us to another level here. We literally have the Archbishop of Canterbury intervening in the Harry and Meghan psychodrama by accusing them of being less than truthful. Justin Welby said that their claim that they were actually man and wife when they appeared in that multi-million-pound wedding in May 2019 is actually untrue. And dare I say, this is very good news for British taxpayers who might have wanted their money back if they found out that it was all one big sham. But it seems that Meghan was trying to introduce a lot of shock value to her interview with Oprah Winfrey, and that saying that they had already been married by the Archbishop 3 days before the Windsor wedding was the way she was doing it. How on earth she thought that such a silly claim would not be investigated and indeed exposed seems absolutely incredible. Now, a very interesting element in all this is that the Archbishop put Meghan and Harry in their place soon after talking to Queen Elizabeth, who, of course, is the head of the Church of England. And this, of course, suggests that the Queen may well have had a word with the Archbishop about putting Meghan and Harry right.
Wow, that really would be something. OK, Nabila, thank you very much indeed. Nigel, thank you very much indeed. Really always appreciate speaking to you guys to look at all of these different stories from around the world. Take care. Until next time, that's Behind the Headlines for today.